I don't like food, I love it. If I don't love it, I don't swallow. Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 22 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about spelunking. My name is Nathan Pottle and thank you so much for joining me today. It is raining outside. I don't know if you can hear it up against the window that I sit next to while I record, but it's raining, it's coming down pretty good. So what better time to just sit down and talk about movies. Today is all about Pixar. We are getting really close to the release of Toy Story 4. I am seeing it tomorrow night. I am so excited. I cannot wait. I absolutely love the Toy Story franchise. I think those movies are phenomenal, and I can't wait to go see this new one. The reviews are looking excellent, so I'm super excited. But for this week, I wanted to break down the existing Pixar movies. So there are 20 feature films that Pixar have released so far. I arranged them in order from least favorite to favorite. So I'm going to go through breaking down which are my least favorite Pixar movies, which ones I think are the best, talk about each of them a little bit, and then next week, after I've seen Toy Story 4 and I've had time to process it, next week's episode is going to be a full review and breakdown of Toy Story 4. I am so excited. I don't get a lot of animated movies that come out each year that I can get really excited about. So this year, the one that I'm really excited about is Toy Story 4. And then we've got Frozen 2 coming out later this year as well from Disney. And there are a few other animated films, like there's The Secret Life of Pets and things like that. But Toy Story 4 is the one that I'm really, really excited about. So Pixar just cranks out such excellent high quality work. There are some exceptions, like you can't always be perfect. And I'm going to talk about those ones first. So why don't I just get started with my list here. Number 20, the worst Pixar movie in my opinion. I don't really enjoy this movie at all. I have seen it just once. Revisiting it, I don't think would help improve my opinion on the movie, and that's going to be Cars 2. So there are 3 Cars movies. Cars 2 is the worst one for sure. It continues on from the first movie, but it has kind of its own complete story, and Mater gets confused with a secret agent, and he goes on this adventure around the world while Lightning McQueen is going on a race around the world, and they happen to coincide, and it's just really bad. What Cars 2 suffers from the most is taking a good side character like Mater and making him the main character. Pixar has done this a couple of other times, like with Finding Dory, taking a really good side character and making them the main focus of the film. We'll talk about Finding Dory later because it's obviously on this list. But I feel like when you have really strong side characters like that, don't put them in the front because they were a side character to begin with for a reason. Because that's where they best serve the story. I just recently rewatched the first Pirates of the Caribbean film, and Jack Sparrow is definitely more of a side character than he is a main character. Like, I would say he's probably a B-tier character of that movie, but all of the other movies put him front and center because everyone loved him so much, and all of the other movies suffer because of it, because Jack Sparrow is better as a side character. I also think Mater is better as a side character as opposed to the main character of the story. So Cars 2 is not a very good movie. I don't know if I've met anyone who really likes it. Some people are just like, yeah, it's okay. But I haven't met anyone who's like, Cars 2 is amazing. Because it's just really not. Moving on to number 19 on the list, that's going to be Cars 3. So Cars 2 is the worst. And then we move into Cars 3, which is not that good, but it's better than Cars 2. This movie is basically Rocky 4. If you've seen Rocky 4, you've basically seen Cars 3. If you've seen Cars 3, you've seen Rocky 4. The plots are practically identical. Now, this movie does have some really beautiful animation to it. Like, there's some really, really spectacular looking scenes and stuff. But overall, it's just not a very rich story. It doesn't really dive deep. It just you're watching cars drive around in a circle, or watch cars crash into each other, or watch cars make jokes at each other. The Cars franchise as a whole it's not very strong. I'm not as into it. Pixar has a lot of better things to offer. So I don't even want to talk about that, because I want to use the bulk of my stuff talking about the really good movies, like the top 10. So these lower tier ones I'm just going to kind of breeze through. Number 18 is The Good Dinosaur. Now, if you've seen The Good Dinosaur, it's the basic story is there's this little dinosaur. He gets separated from his family and he makes his way home, and he has like a pet human who like acts like a dog. This movie had the potential to be a lot better than it was. It made some really distinct choices with the animation, which confuses me a lot, because the nature setting of the world, like the trees and the clouds and the mountains and everything, all look super real. Like, if you look at some of the scenery, you might think that someone just went out and took a picture of a forest, because that's how real everything looks. But then the dinosaurs themselves all have kind of a stylistic, cartoony look to them. And it just, like, those two different styles really clash. And so that threw me off while watching the movie. And then also, the story is, like, it's nothing new. It wasn't really unique in its concept. And so because of that, it didn't really have anything to bring me in. And so because of that, I wasn't as invested, and the characters weren't super interesting. So it just did nothing for me. So The Good Dinosaur is going to be number 18. Not a great film. Number 17 on the list. Like I said, we're just moving through really, really quick here. Number 17 for me is The Incredibles 2. So I'm actually not a huge fan of the first Incredibles, but I do think it is better than The Incredibles 2. This movie did some interesting things. Like, I have issues with the way like the people are animated and stuff. I don't think the animation style of The Incredibles is my favorite, so I'm not as into that. But the story itself, like, it has that role reversal from the first movie. Like, in the first one, there's like the stay-at-home mom and he's out saving the world, and in the second one he's the stay-at-home dad and she's out saving the world. That's all fine and good. It has a plot twist with the villain that you see coming from a mile away. Like, it wasn't a surprise to anybody in the theater, I'm sure, unless you're a really young child who's never seen a movie before. Like, you can definitely see it coming from a mile away. This movie also had trouble with the nature of the villain of this film. There were people like suffering from seizures and stuff. There's big like strobe light effects of like lights flashing on and off really, really fast. And so because of that, it caused a lot of people to have seizures in the theater. And so this movie just made some poor decisions, and I wasn't super into the story. There were some really good funny moments. Like, when I think about it looking back, like, there's a part where the dad is trying to get Violet to spend time with this boy that she likes, and so they go to the restaurant where he works. That little scene is really, really funny and works super well. But as a whole, the Incredibles just doesn't work for me. A lot of people really love The Incredibles, and it's like their favorite Pixar movie. But for me, The Incredibles 2 is number 17 on my list. It's not really that amazing. Moving on, number 16 is Finding Dory. So I love Finding Nemo. It's a wonderful film. Finding Dory suffers from the same problem that Cars 2 suffers from. Dory is a great side character. She's not a main character. When you take someone who is primarily comic relief and doesn't have a lot of depth to them and bring them into the forefront, you have to manufacture depth for these characters. And when there's not really anything there and you just gotta make things up, it shows. So very clearly, all of like her backstory and her family and stuff it didn't seem as well thought out to me as some other Pixar storylines that I've seen. Like this whole thing with like Dory being from an aquarium at this big, it was at the San Diego Zoo or some kind of zoo somewhere, that they lived in the aquarium part and she ended up in the ocean somehow. And because of her short-term memory loss, she doesn't remember anything. That short-term memory loss, by the way, is such a convenient plot device that it drives me crazy. Like, they can be like, oh, Dory forgot something that's important, and so therefore we can do this with the story. And then they'll go, oh, Dory remembers this because for whatever reason she can now remember things for this part of the story, and then we can go ahead and do this. Having that aspect of Dory's memory playing into plot points and stuff really, really drives me crazy. Actually, that's not even the worst part of this movie. The biggest thing is at the end of this movie, like the septipod, because he's not an octopus, the septipod, Hank, I think his name is, and Dory and Marlin are like driving a truck down a street, and then there's like baby otters that cause like a huge car pileup, and I don't understand what's going on in that scene. Not in the sense that I don't get what's happening, but in the sense that, like, why did Pixar think like, oh, this, like, fish can drive cars, let's do that? It just doesn't make any sense to me. It's not a very good scene, and it's also the climax of the movie. So when the climax of the movie doesn't work because it's so outlandish and ridiculous, then the rest of the movie falls apart because what you're building up to isn't something that works. So Finding Dory is a weak movie. I wasn't super into it. Moving on to number 15. This is a movie that my older sister really enjoys. I don't like it as much. It's a little movie called Monsters University. Monsters University is a prequel to Monsters Incorporated, showing like how Mike and Sully met and their time at college and stuff like that. And it's just like, it felt like it wanted to be like a Revenge of the Nerds type movie, but because it was animated in Pixar, they didn't really have the guts to go as like dark with it as they could have, with like Mike being bullied and everything like that. I just felt that this movie didn't have the guts to do what it could have done in order to make it a stronger film. Monsters University is not my favorite. What's interesting about my list so far, so I've gone from 20 to 15, so number 15 to 20, only one of them is not a sequel. So we've got Cars 2, Cars 3, Good Dinosaur, that's an original movie, Incredibles 2, Finding Dory, Monsters University. So looking at this list that I have here, and almost all of the Pixar sequels are at the bottom of the list for me. And it's interesting to see that pattern because the Toy Story sequels are not at the bottom here. The Toy Story sequels, for whatever reason, are the only ones that they're able to get exactly right. And that's part of why I'm so excited for Toy Story 4. Because Toy Story 1, spectacular movie. Toy Story 2, just as good. Toy Story 3, I think, is the best one out of all of them, which maybe I'm getting ahead of myself in the list here, but the point is, all of these sequels don't work. So are they cash grabs? Are they just not as well thought out? What is going on here? Why is Toy Story different from the rest of these sequels? And I think I know why. I'm going to talk about it when I get to the Toy Story movies in my list. But I think a lot of it does have to do with money. Because the Cars movies, I believe the Cars movies exist to sell toys and to make money. And that's why Cars 2 and Cars 3 are at the very bottom of my list. I don't think they're strong films. I think they're very flashy and they're bright and they're colorful. And they're just 2 hours to distract kids, and that's all they are. So it's interesting that all of these other sequels don't hold up and they're not put on the same level as the Toy Story movies, and they're not made with that same quality. But that's probably enough about that. I'm going to keep moving on in the list. Number 14 for me is The Incredibles. Now, like I said earlier with The Incredibles 2, there's something about the animation with these movies that I don't really like. The way the characters look and the way that they move. I feel like they experimented with like a slightly different style of animation for The Incredibles. And for whatever reason, it just puts me off. If a movie, when it comes to animated films for me, if the animation looks strange or cheap, then I'm not going to be into it. That's not to say that I'm not into different types of animation, because I really enjoy anime and I like this kind of animation. I like traditional cell animation. the way that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse looks is phenomenal, and that's really different from everything we've seen before in animation. So it's not that I'm against different forms of animation, I just don't like it when animation feels cheap to me. And for whatever reason, there's something about that first Incredibles movie that the animation feels cheap. I do like the family aspect of the story, and I think that works really well. But as a whole, I don't think it's as strong a movie as what Pixar has put out. And that's actually not even really a blight against The Incredibles, because everything else that Pixar has put, like creating a top 10 best Pixar movies, is actually really difficult. Because a lot of these movies are phenomenal. Like, they're just top tier, best at storytelling, beautiful animation, all of these things. So the fact that Incredibles is number 14 isn't even really a testament to Incredibles being bad, but it's a testament to just how good everything else is. So I think the movie is fine. I'm not as into it as other people are, and that's okay. I'm going to move on to number 13 on my list, is a movie called Brave. Now, Brave is an interesting one. It's another one that like focuses on human characters, and there's magic and stuff, and people turn into bears, and it's all about changing your fate. If I had $1 for every time the word fate was used in the movie Brave, I'd probably have enough money to buy it on Blu-ray or something. Like, it comes up so often, so many times. And it bothers me a little bit when the same motif keeps being brought up in the same movie again and again and again and again and again. Like, a similar example would be in Rogue One, a Star Wars story. If I had $1 for every time they used the word hope in that movie, I would have lots of money too, because they keep bashing you over the head with it. And I don't want the messages of a movie to be handed to me on a silver platter. I want them to be beneath the surface where I have to dig and look for them. And I want to be able to feel the lessons of the movie, not told them. So even though I think Brave is all right and it has beautiful animation, there are just some things about it that I don't think is as good as what other movies Pixar has to offer. Number 12 is Cars. So the first Cars movie comes in at number 12 for my list. This movie is pretty good. It's also flashy and colorful, and I think trying to sell toys and whatever. But I think it has more to say than Cars 2 and Cars 3. Actually, not even I think. I know for sure this movie has more to say than that. Lightning McQueen having, like, literally getting out of living in the fast lane and just slowing down and experiencing life and seeing how other people live and all of these different aspects that come up in the film, it's a lot more introspective than the other Cars movies, and so that's why, for me, it comes in at number 12. Number 11. So this is the last one before we get into the top 10. We're really starting to get into the heavy hitters of movies. For number 11 for me, it is Pixar's second feature film ever, and that is A Bug's Life. So A Bug's Life is interesting. I think it's loosely based off of a Shakespeare play or off of some other kind of story. I can't remember for sure. But this is such a fun story and interesting characters and a fascinating look at the world of bugs and how they live and how they interact. And the grasshoppers are like these gangsters who, like, they get paid protection fees or whatever. And it's just so interesting. And Kevin Spacey plays the bad guy. Kevin Spacey is a perfect villain. If you look at like some of the real life stuff about him that's been coming out, it seems like he's a real life villain too. But I don't want to get into that, because then like we could talk about John Lasseter too and some of the stuff that's come up about him. If you don't know who John Lasseter is, he's like one of the founders of Pixar. He directed the first few Pixar movies, and then he's like an executive producer. He recently left Pixar and Disney. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the merit of people's work. And Kevin Spacey is a very talented performer, and he's given a lot of really great performances in his life, and Hopper in A Bug's Life is no different. So I really enjoy A Bug's Life. I think it's a lot of fun. really like this movie, but there are 10 others that I enjoy more. And here we go. We're getting into the top 10. Number 10 for me, I know, is a lot higher on my brother's list for Pixar films, and that is Finding Nemo. So Finding Nemo is the story of Marlin, who is a single dad who's trying to raise his son, whose name is Nemo, and he's very overprotective, and because of that, he kind of pushes his son away, and then his son gets kidnapped, and he goes on an adventure across the ocean to 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, to save his son from the evil dentist. Actually, the dentist isn't evil. He just has a lot of money and likes going deep sea diving, and then he actually thinks that he saved Nemo. But no, the dentist isn't evil. Darla's the one who's evil. She walks in the door, she slams it open, and she's got those terrifying braces, and the horror music goes by. Darla! And everyone is terrified of Darla, and they're all trying to hide from her, and she is tapping the glass on the fish, and it's driving them crazy. This is another movie that has a lot of really good characters, and it's just so deep. It's a story about a father and a son trying to be reunited. And yes, they're fish, and there's seagulls, and there's other birds and other fish, and there's the group of sharks who are trying to not eat fish anymore. So it does take on that little bit of the ridiculous and the fantastic, like all of the sea turtles and the East Australian current, all of those sequences all look really good. And when they go to the bottom of the ocean and there's the angler fish and he all lights up, all of those sequences look amazing. And it's a fascinating world, and it's bright and it's colorful. All of these characters, they also just it all just works. Everything about this movie works. And it's really just so heartwarming and touching, right? I remember seeing this movie in theaters when I was just a youngin'. I think it came out in 2003 or 2004, so I would have been about 10 or 11 when this movie came out. The opening of this movie actually got to me. It was very emotional, and I was a little bit sad, because the mom sacrifices herself for all of her children, and it doesn't matter. Because the mom got eaten, and then so did all of the eggs, except for one, little baby Nemo. And that's why Marlin is so protective of him, and there's so much to this story, there's so much depth, and it's beautiful and it's wonderful, and I love it. So number 10 is Finding Nemo. In all of the history of the Academy Awards, only 3 animated films have ever been nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Not Best Animated Feature, Best Picture. So only 3 times ever has the Academy Awards felt that an animated movie is good enough to be nominated for the main prize. The first time it ever happened was in 1991 for the animated film Beauty and the Beast. Go back and watch that movie if you haven't seen it in a while. That is a ridiculously good movie. It is excellent. Another one that was nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards is my number 9, and that is a movie called Up. Up is the story about an old man who, after losing his wife, travels to South America by tying a bunch of helium balloons to his house and going to South America. But it's not even the fact that that's what he's doing. He goes to South America to honor the memory of his wife and the adventures that they weren't able to have together. And that's, it's such a beautiful story this movie has. Sure, there's talking dogs and a bird that likes to eat chocolate and a little boy who doesn't know how to dig a latrine, but all of that is secondary to the story. And Carl loved his wife more than anything else in the world, and he just wants to fulfill that promise that he wasn't able to throughout all of their marriage. And he wants to honor her memory and take their house down to South America, to Paradise Falls, where they wanted to go on an adventure, where they wanted to live. But he learns more about himself and how he can be a parental figure for Russell, and Russell is just a hilarious character. This movie doesn't have an abundance of characters like a lot of other Pixar movies do. It's a very small and contained story, even though it's this big grand adventure that they go on, but it's really just about Carl. Sure, he's a bit of a salty old man, but like at his heart, who he is inside, and like he's really just a good person. I love this movie. The only reason it's not higher up on my list for me is because like the dog characters get a little annoying for me at points, and I don't like that aspect of the story too much. And near the end, like you have the old men fighting each other on top of a blimp, and I just don't buy that these old men are able to do it, even though you have that funny moments where like their backs get sore and stiff or whatever. But overall, like the climax of that movie, I feel isn't as strong. But that opening 10 minutes, and everyone on the internet will agree that those opening 10 minutes of Carl and Ellie's life together is amazing. Absolutely beautiful. And the musical score by Michael Giacchino is brilliant and beautiful. I absolutely love it. So, Up is number 9 on my list. We're going to move on to number 8, Monsters Incorporated. This is a movie that also came out when I was pretty young, so I remember having this movie with me my entire life. We had it on VHS growing up. We had like Monsters Incorporated like plates at home that like we ate dinner off of. Is absolutely great. This movie is so inventive with the way that it uses monsters scaring kids. So like the technology of like the doors and going from their world into the human world, and using children's screams as their energy source, and they're going through an energy crisis because kids aren't scared as easily anymore. It's really all so fascinating. And I think that's one of the main strengths of Monsters Incorporated is its world building. And I think that's where Monsters University fails a little bit, because it's not showing us what's different about this world than ours. It's actually showing us just how similar it is, with like going to college and going to raging parties and things like that. So I think that that's why Monsters University doesn't hold up as strong, because Monsters Incorporated has really interesting world stuff. And like Mr. Waternoose is a terrifying bad guy with like his legs crawling around. Randall is also kind of scary. He can turn invisible and like chokes people. And the relationship between Mike and Sully, like their friendship is like the crux of this movie, and their dynamic and their back and forth, voiced by John Goodman and Billy Crystal. Excellent talents, both of them. Everything about Monsters Inc. is just, it's really, really good. If it's been a while since you've seen Monsters Inc., why don't you toss it in, give it a watch. It's actually, rewatch the Toy Story movies, because Toy Story 4 is almost out, and you want to have them fresh in your mind. So yeah, just watch Toy Story again. I'm going to move on from Monsters Inc. on to number 7, which for me is going to be Ratatouille. It's kind of a hard word to spell. It took me a while to learn how to remember how to spell it. I know how to spell it now, though, so good for me there. Ratatouille is an interesting one because it's about like breaking down barriers, and just because you're a rat doesn't mean you have to eat garbage. Just because I'm whatever doesn't, like, it's all about like breaking those social barriers, right? So even though someone looks at you a certain way doesn't mean that you're beholden to that. And I think that's an important message. Also, this is another movie that has a lot of really interesting and unique characters. Like Remy's brother is pretty hilarious. All of the cooks and stuff in the kitchen, Linguini, and like getting into the mystery of Linguini's past and who he's related to and who his father is and who his mother is. Remy also being at odds with his father, so we get that parallel of Remy being against his father and then Linguini actually not even knowing who his dad is. So it's an interesting dynamic between those two characters, especially because they can't communicate. Because Remy's a rat and Linguini is a person, they have to find other ways to communicate and to understand each other, and they form that understanding, and they form a bond of trust, and the trust gets broken. There's just a lot to this movie, and that's just a testament of the story group at Pixar can tell a beautiful story about a rat. Just think about that for a second. Heartwarming story about a rat. Sure, he's voiced by Patton Oswalt, who's always fun, but when you think about the dynamics of the story, that's where this movie really shines. It's absolutely a movie worth watching, excellent, and that's why for me it's number 7 on this list of already incredible movies. It's time for number 6, and it's time for Toy Story to finally start making its way onto the list. So for number 6 for me is Toy Story 2. I think it is the weakest of the 3 Toy Story movies, but that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. It's a great movie. I love this movie. But there are 3 of them, and one of them has to be the weakest and one has to be the strongest. And for me, Toy Story 2 is the weakest. It introduces a lot of great new characters. It introduced Jessie and Bullseye and Stinky Pete and Al from Al's Toy Barn and Emperor Zurg. So we got a lot of really good things from this movie. And it tears your heart out when Jessie sings her little song about how her owner didn't care about her anymore and just left her and then gave her away. That's the thing about the Toy Story movies, is that they're so emotional and they know exactly what they are and what they're about. And even though, yes, they're hilarious and they're funny, but they are here to tell you a story that has meaning. And that's just spectacular. So Toy Story 2 is number 6 for me, and we're moving into the top 5. These next 5 movies are phenomenal. They're absolute works of art. They are brilliant. I'm going to sound like a broken record talking about these 5 movies because I just have nothing but praise about them. So I don't even know if I'm going to get super in-depth with each of these films because I don't want to sound like I'm just saying the same thing over and over and over again because I feel like I might have already been doing that during this episode. So here we are. I'm just going to pick something specific about each movie to talk about. Number 5 is such a beautiful movie because the first half hour or so of this movie doesn't even have any dialogue, and that's WALL-E. So WALL-E is the story of this little robot who's working to clean up all the garbage on Earth while the humans live in space, and he falls in love with a newer version of a robot. It's just this story of these 2 robots and saving Earth. I know there's more to it than that. It's a little more complicated, but I don't want to get into the intricacies of the story of WALL-E because there's a lot there. I could maybe do an entire episode just on WALL-E and the depth of this story. And that's the thing about the rest of these movies in my top 5 is there's so much depth. And as much depth as there is in WALL-E, there's just as much in my number 4 movie, and that's Inside Out. I love this movie so much. It is so unique in how it lets us think about how we use our emotions and how they affect what we do. Now, some people came away from this movie thinking that, we're just slaves to our emotions and they control what we do. But that's not what the movie's trying to get across with how it displays emotions. It's trying to show us how we use our emotions together and how they influence each other and how we're feeling can really affect what we do in our lives if we are not in check of our emotions and not in control of what we do. And the islands of personality and how the memories work, and Bing Bong the imaginary friend gets me every single time, and I'm getting emotional just thinking about what goes on within the movie Inside Out. It's just spectacular. And yes, it's brightly colored and it is very high energy and fast paced and has some action beats to it, but this is a movie about emotions. And so because of that, prepare to feel something, because the story team at Pixar went all out with this movie and it paid off 100%. Moving on to number 3 is going to be the original Pixar feature film, Toy Story. Toy Story is the Pixar movie, is the first one. It is the first 100% digitally animated film, and it holds up to this day. It came out in 1995 and is still a great movie. Does the animation 100% hold up? Not exactly. I can pop in my Blu-ray edition and I still think it looks good, but it obviously doesn't look as good as something that comes out nowadays, right? But the story is what holds up, and the humor holds up because it's all very situational and all has to do directly with those characters. Like going back and rewatching movies like Shrek and Aladdin, they make a lot of pop culture references that don't hold up today because that kind of humor worked for the time that those movies came out. And Toy Story didn't do that. It makes a couple of pop culture references, but not too many, because that's not what this movie is. It's looking inward, and it's making jokes about itself, about its world. And sure, you can ask a lot of questions about how the Toy Story world works and all of these different things, all of that stuff, but it doesn't matter because the characters and the story are what you care about. And that's all there is to it. Toy Story is about self-identity, about knowing who you are. And that's something that Buzz Lightyear struggles with in the first movie. And it's something that Woody struggles with in the second movie. And there's so much. There's so much. Those Toy Story movies, they get you. I love these series of movies, and that's why I'm so excited for Toy Story 4. I can't wait to see it. But here we go. We're going to talk about number 2. Number 2 is maybe one of the most beautiful movies I have ever seen. After I saw it in the theater, I was crying uncontrollably, like through half of the credits, and my wife was trying to talk to me about how I liked the movie, and I just could not stop crying, and that's Coco. I love Coco. I will never stop loving Coco. I will never stop telling people to watch this movie. I will sing this movie's praises all day long if people let me. Coco, family is a thing that's very important to me, and this movie is all about the importance of family. I just absolutely am just 100% on board with the story that this movie's telling. I'm on board with the world that it's introducing us to. I'm on board with the beauty of the animation. I'm on board with the Mexican culture. I am just so on board with this movie. I can only think of one negative thing to say about this movie, and it's not even a big deal. I don't really like the dog character as much, and I don't feel he has very much to do, but that's a very minor thing. The rest of this movie is perfect. I feel that this movie doesn't get as much love as it deserves. This movie really speaks to me personally, and I hope it speaks to a lot of other people out there. And before I started doing my podcast, I did movie reviews on YouTube, and my review for Coco got the most views of all of my other videos that I ever done by a lot, actually. Like, my YouTube channel is nothing to brag about. I didn't get very many views, but that one Coco review, I think last I looked, is at like 17,000 views, which for me is really, really good. I know you look at some of those other YouTube guys who get like hundreds of thousands of views, but for me, that's 17,000, that feels pretty good. That's pretty crazy that many people would be interested on my opinions of this movie. I have seen it over 5 times at this point, I think. Every single time I cry at the end. Every single time. I have not been able to get over the level of emotion that this movie makes me feel. I cannot express how much I love this movie. It is beautiful, it is wonderful, and you should just watch it if you have not seen Coco. We're down to number 1. There's only one Pixar movie that I haven't mentioned, and if you're following along and keeping track, you already know what it is. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to get right into it. I said earlier that there are only 3 movies ever, 3 animated films to be nominated for Best Picture: Beauty and the Beast, Up, and my number 1 is the 3rd movie, and that's Toy Story 3. I recently rewatched Toy Story 3 in order to get ready for Toy Story 4, and this movie has everything you could want. It has humor, it has emotion, it has painful emotion, and then it has happy emotion. Like, this movie ends on such a roller coaster of emotions, like when all of the toys are at the garbage dump and they're holding hands and they're ready to die, and then they get saved. I 100%, when this movie came out in 2010 and I was seeing it in theaters, I 100% was convinced that this is how the movie's ending and they're all about to die. 100%. I did not think that there was going to be any kind of ex machina to save them or whatever. Thankfully I was wrong, but it really pulled on my emotions, and then to see Andy give all the toys away to Bonnie, and he has one last time playing with all the toys with Bonnie, and Woody is the last one left in the box, and he doesn't want to give him away. And then he gives Woody to Bonnie, and she lines them all up on the deck, and they're waving goodbye, and Andy drives away in his car, and Woody says, "So long, old friend." And it just was so perfect. It was a beautiful ending to this story that was being told over 15 years, from 1995 to 2010. 15 years between movie number 1 and movie number 3, and here we are 9 years later after Toy Story 3, and we're getting another one. And I have absolute faith in Pixar that Toy Story 4 is going to be amazing, that I'm going to love it. Even though Toy Story 3 felt like a really good, perfect ending, I am ready for more. I love these characters. I want to see them appear more, and I cannot wait. So there we go. That is my official ranking of the existing Pixar films. I don't know how Toy Story 4 is going to fit in there. I got to see it first. Probably see it a couple times to really know how it hits me, and we can go back from there. Next week will be my Toy Story 4 review, so be sure to stick around for that. I would love to know which Pixar movie is your favorite, whether it's Finding Nemo or Inside Out, Toy Story, Coco, even Cars. If that's your favorite, I would love to know. Please reach out to me. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at PoddleNathan, on Instagram at Poddle Productions. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I will always find an excuse to talk about animated movies. I absolutely love them, and today is no exception. So once again, thank you for listening to today's episode, and if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.